Observe the Sabbath day to keep it holy as the Lord your God commanded you. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is the Sabbath of the Lord your God. It is a day you shall not do any work. Now, here comes a trick question. Boy, if you wouldn't answer the first question, I bet you won't answer this one. Are we still under the law to observe the Sabbath? Wow, look at all these people. Well, Ron, how come then we have the 10 Commandments out in front of our old building? You don't know. Okay, there's an honest man. Well, before I answer that, I won't be like Ron and simply give you an answer. Let me qualify before I even say anything. A couple of verses. Romans 6:14, for sin shall not have dominion over you, for you are not under law, but under grace. So when we look at whatever we look at, here's the first thing to keep in mind. You are not under law, you are under grace. Kind of answers our first question. Ron's not always right, but sounds like he's right that time. 2 Corinthians 3:3, then they can see that you are a letter from Christ written by us. What an interesting picture, huh? Did you ever think of yourself in your Christianity that way? You're not just a person, you're not just you are a letter from Christ. Coming in here this morning, if you're a professing believer, you're supposed to be a letter from Christ. When you leave this building, you're supposed to be a letter from Christ. It is not a letter written with a pen and ink, but by the Spirit of the living God, not one carved on stone, but in human hearts. So in fact, it's true, we are not under the law to observe the Sabbath. However, we are under the principle. What's the difference? What's the difference in this? Well, let me just back up and say, if we don't get this right, you're in for a very unhealthy ride. You're in for a very unhealthy spiritual walk. This is very important. If we do get this right, if we understand work and we understand rest according to what God says, what will happen is we will then understand the meaning why we even do those things, and the balance between work and rest will become very obvious to us, or more obvious. And if we don't get them, we will pay a very heavy price, a very heavy price. Putting that secret of the balance and how it's supposed to work, let me start with actually kind of the cryptic small meaning and then go from there. This is what we are told to do. We are told to glorify and work and keep holy and rest. If you reach a point by the end of this message or later when Debbie explains it to you, because she's heard it twice already, but if you get this, we are told to glorify and work and be holy and rest. Your life will fall into balance. It will come into balance. So what does it mean to do that? Well, let's start with, what does it mean to glorify and work? What does that mean? Think of the first work advice you were ever given. Start here. Probably if you were a teen, you started thinking this way, is that, boy, success will be when you get the job you love and you get to do that for a living. Don't we all think that we all, at least start out, maybe later on in life, don't know so much, but we say, there's success, you get the job you love. As a matter of fact, that was one of the things on the video. There was a whole lot of different takes on work there, wasn't there? That was one of them. I have a job I love, and I love coming to work, and say, well, there's a successful work life. But I would share this. I think it is actually more fortunate, at least for your first job or two, if you end up in a job you don't like. That is actually on the road to success. Two great challenges in the whole area of work. Call it personal opinion or observation, but I think these challenges can be backed up both by experience and Scripture. The two big challenges are this: to find contentment in work you don't like, and to avoid being consumed in work you do like. We're always fighting with one or the other. The whole culture is in one place or the other, either looking for contentment in work you don't like or trying to avoid being consumed by the work you do like. I did appreciate that a number of them on there, especially the lady near the end. I love to work. She says, I work all the time. So almost as a confession, because it is very easy to get consumed by work you like. In terms of the Christ follower, this is how, if we take all of this little bit we said so far, the Apostle Paul talks about his work life like this. Philippians, he's talking to the church in Philippi, 4:12 through 13. I know how to be abased, and I know how to abound. Everywhere and in all things I have learned both to be full and to be hungry, both to abound and to suffer. He has found a way. There's something underlying that no matter what he's in, he's found a way to be at peace in it, to be productive in it. Funny thing, we tend to leave that off, and then all Christians, if they have a Bible verse memorized, they've got the next one. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. And we use that for everything. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. But remember the context. It's talking about your work life. It's talking about your work life as more than just your work life. If we're in Christ, the definition of being a Christian is, the definition of the word is little Christ. By theological basics, to be a Christian is to have some element of Christ in you. If there is no Christ in you, you're not really a Christian. I don't care what you believe. And neither does Scripture. That's where I'm going from that. It's having Christ in you. So no matter what you do, whether you go to college, whether you are a tattoo artist, whether you're anything, your work is permeated with Christ because Christ is who you are. You take that into your work. It fits into your ambitions. Christ is first. This is the first secret to the balance that Paul is talking about. I've had it rough. I've had it well. I can do all things because Christ is in me. Christ is the deciding factor. 3 touch points on this. What's God's concept of work? And just to try and sound clever and all of that, these 3 touch points are all going to start with an S. So, and that way maybe we can all remember them to a degree. So in looking at God's concept of work, start with my first S is sustenance. I'm starting with the most obvious down to the most important. There's a reason we say that, right? What do you do for a living? We have a reason we use that phrase, because that's how I earn the money to eat so I can stay alive and have a roof over my head. So sustenance is a major part of it. But as long as Christians have been around, there's been a certain tension between the idea of practicing your Christianity and kindness and others who will abuse the kindness that we're supposed to show. So Paul, writing to the church in Thessalonica, he actually gave us a really good principle that deals with work, dealing with how the church was doing there altogether. 2 Thessalonians 3:10 goes like this. For even when we were with you, we commanded you this, if anyone will not work, neither shall he eat. For we hear that there are some who walk among you in a disorderly manner, not working at all, but are busybodies. So the idea of not working is not such a good thing. But here is a really straightforward motto for work. Will not work, shall not eat. We could turn that into a rap song or something, couldn't we? It's will not work, shall not eat. Will not work, shall not eat. Notice he doesn't say cannot. He says will not. That implies something, doesn't it? It's a choice. It's the capacity is there, but I choose not to work. I will not work. Well, that's fine. Don't work, but then you don't eat. That's the way it's meant to fit together. Kind of an interesting thing to consider, and where our own welfare system has taken us in its thinking now, doesn't it? We are meant to work. We are meant to choose to work. Little Kyle even had it right on there, didn't he? It said, for the benefit of the economy and for oneself to work. will not work, will not eat. Practical side there, working. But it's not the full picture of work, that just because you can feed yourself. It's a start, but that's not the full picture. Take us to the second S, substance. You need your sustenance. So what do I mean by this with substance? Let's go back to the beginning of everything, of creation. I want you to kind of sit back and think of what I read here with your imagination. I want you to try and put yourself into what was God's mindset. How was God feeling? What was he thinking as he did this? Genesis 1:31, then God saw everything that he had made, and indeed it was very good. So the evening and the morning were the sixth day. What impression do you get of God? Certain sense of satisfaction, maybe? Gratification for the good that he steps back and he looks at what he's done. It was interesting as if Steve was in the first service, and Steve, it always relates back to cars and painting somehow. And he said, that's how we saw God. He said, you paint that car, you got no bugs on the paint, and the detailing came out. You just sit back and go, wow, that's a good job. That came out well. That's not such a bad thing to do, because that was the nature of God, to find satisfaction in what he did. He worked, and then he stepped back and he looked at the big picture. And because he did the job well, there was gratification as he stepped back and looked at it. We're made in the image of God. That same thing is meant to be in us. It's not wrong to feel proud of a good job. Not pride as in arrogant, but proud of a good job. Satisfaction. That's built into us. And that is one of the things work can do. It can bring that integrity into us. The New Testament takes that from thousands of years before and gets turned into an application. To the Colossians, Paul says this, Colossians 3:23, whatever your task, work heartily as serving the Lord and not men. Whatever your work, do it as serving the Lord and not men. And I would say this takes us a step further. You see, as Christians, it's not just serving the Lord. It is serving as the Lord. It is doing your work by the same nature God does his work. It's meant to be done in the same way. There's a quality of character that comes through right work, honest work. There's an exercise of God's nature in true work. Here's a thought. Can you imagine if everyone who professed to be a Christian, that your work ethic was so much like God that somebody says, you're going to hire Jennifer to do this job. Oh, she's a Christian. No worries. It'll be a fabulous job. Or even as a customer on the other side of the labor thing. Oh, so-and-so's your client. Oh, you're going to love them. How do you know? Well, I don't really know them, but they're a Christian. It's all set. That's the way it's supposed to be. Question, is that the way it is? I think of one group, and in the first service, I kind of said, see if anybody thought of the same people. Does a group come to mind? And the answer did kind of line up. It was the Amish. One thing, if you're a Christian or you're not a Christian, in the work ethic of the Amish is to work as to the Lord. Everybody wants wood cabinets built by the Amish, right? If they work on their house, the Amish, why? They're known for their good work, and their good work deals directly with their faith and their religion. And that is the way we're supposed to be. Not just as serving the Lord, but because the same nature is in us, we should be. There's a number one indicator of where somebody is really with God, isn't it? It is an indicator in their work ethic. It's a place where the rubber meets the road. It will show in how you do whatever you do. The jobs you love, yeah, but the jobs you don't love too. It's all those things. So there is a substance of the person built into work. There is a sense of integrity that only comes through honest work. So we have that to consider. But the third and most important thing is service. As far as Christians, our sustenance is not number one. Strangely as that may sound. Even our substance, even though that's important, is not number one. If we look through Scripture, it is really service. It comes down to service. How so? There is in Proverbs a very interesting, the last chapter, as a matter of fact, describing a beautiful woman. And the king has written this down. In fact, it was like, if you want to marry the perfect woman, here she is described out for the rest of the chapter. This is the perfect woman. Here's the template. So we're looking at the ideal. Interesting enough, I either forgot or kind of re-remembered or something. That perfect woman actually isn't described by a man. It's described by a woman. How so? Well, Proverbs 31:1. The words of King Lemuel, the utterance which his mother taught him. Hey, there's a job for a mom, isn't it? You think, mom with your son? Teach them what a perfect woman is so they know what they're looking for. And here's how the wise woman paints the beautiful woman. Proverbs 31:13. She seeks wool and flax and willingly works with her hands. She is like the merchant ship. She brings her food from afar. She also rises while it is yet night and provides food for her household and a portion for her maidservants. She considers a field and buys it. From her profits, she plants a vineyard. You know, here back we talk about the Old Testament. Man, they were really down on women. Man, this lady puts Martha Stewart to shame, right? She is working. She is working at a whole bunch of levels. And the payoff comes down to this. Proverbs 31:21. She is not afraid of snow for her household, for all her household is clothed with scarlet. Well, what's snow representing? Those hard times when, man, if you don't have it right, you're going to be very uncomfortable. So this lady is prepared because of her work, and so is her household. She's taking care of people. So you say, okay, well, that fits in with the whole sustenance thing going on. Well, I thought we were talking service. Interesting enough, the line even before her own welfare is this, 31:20. She says, she extends her hand to the poor. Yes, she reaches out her hand to the needy. Poor and needy, two different words. And actually two slightly different meanings. But notice this, even before everything else, one of the things this woman does is take care of others. God has blessed her in her stuff. Why? So she can help others. Is that really so surprising? Especially from the Christian standpoint, there should be a duh. Think of it. God is a giver. It starts with creation of everything. He gave us the universe in which we live. But we kind of mess that up. So then we get to the New Testament, and God is giving again. This time he is giving himself. He is giving out of grace. He is giving what we don't deserve, but we need. God is giving. By nature, God is a giver. By nature. Not because he has to. By nature, God is a giver. This is really important for your Christian understanding. Because if God is in you, then that means automatically, by default, if he's in you, by nature, you become a giver. I don't have to tell you the benefits of giving to others. Because if God is in you, by nature, you become a giver. And how do you give? In the same way you received, you give by grace. And you give according to grace. But there is a wisdom into how we are supposed to give. She gives to the poor and needy. Was this beautiful woman just a sap? Did she just give to everybody? You know, she was a soft touch. Is that Christian compassion? No, because it doesn't fit the work ethic. We know that work brings integrity to the person's heart, mind, and soul. So the idea is for them not to be working and just give so they don't have to work. As a matter of fact, there was a very, very practical law back in the Old Testament times. In Leviticus 23:22, that law went like this. When you reap the harvest of your land, so this is one for Kevin, when you do your corn, Kev. When you reap the harvest of your land, do not reap to the very edges of your field, or gather the gleanings of your harvest. Leave them for the poor and for the foreigner residing among you. In effect, leave them for the jobless. When you reap your field, leave some there for the jobless. How does that work in? Well, one, it's a guard against becoming too greedy. Let me squeeze every bit of profit and then some. Might be good in business practice in our world, but God says, don't go there. You don't want to go there. I'm giving you as it is. I want you to leave some of that there. Well, why? That sounds like waste. Not really. Because those who don't have it themselves can come and glean. Now notice, he didn't say, here's the law, reap everything, and then bag some and leave it on the side of the road. He says, reap what you can, leave the gleanings. What happens then? There is the opportunity and the dignity for people to take care of themselves. Those who don't have fields can come and work and collect their own food. It's an opportunity for you leave them a sense of work and dignity. And here comes the principle in all of this, is how do you apply that? Now, Dr. Tackett, when we do the evening session, I'm stealing this directly from him because I thought it was a great story from his session, 7 o'clock, by the way. Dr. Tackett talks about this guy who was in his church, actually, and he was struggling with this. He said, well, you know what? We're not all Kevin Kendall, and we don't all have farms. We don't. So how do you apply this to how do I apply this to my life? This factory owner was thinking. Now, the factory owner in this case, he was working in wood products. So I don't know, maybe he was even Amish, I don't know. But he had a factory, he was working in wood products, and at the end of every day, they were left with a lot of sawdust. If you've worked in wood, you know how that goes there. It builds up really quickly. And he also knew there was another company in the same county that would pay good money for the sawdust. So he came up with an idea. He opened his factory after work hours to anyone who wanted to or needed to come in with their broom and with their bags or whatever, sweep up as much of the sawdust for free that they could get in a bag, as much as they wanted to get, and then he would direct them. They had a pipeline to sell it to this other place. He provided work. He just didn't give. He provided work, and he allowed people to come in and have a little dignity and self-respect in doing their own thing, making their own way. Well, we might say, well, okay, how does that work? And what about people who couldn't come in and sweep? Here's the beauty of it, and the difference with the poor and the needy. That man could afford from his abundance to give to people who really couldn't work, that they really couldn't. It's called Christian charity. Jesus did it. We're called to do it. The people who really can't take care of themselves in a way, we're called to help. We have since the very first church did that. However, in the self-respect, even those who came in and swept and made a living from sweeping up the stuff and selling it, if they were diligent enough, maybe they only had a few pennies or a few dollars left over, but they too could turn around and give to those who were truly in need. You see the whole paradigm going on here. The integrity of the work. The opportunity and the kindness, not necessarily to give, but to offer the dignity of work where we can. And then to those who are truly in distress, to give. But guarding before even someone's stomach is guarding their dignity and their soul. Those three things, sustenance, substance, service, and service being the most important of all, those are what's behind the work side. How about the holiness then? I said there's the glorifying in work, is that you are being Christ to other people. What does it mean to glorify? To be stamped with the image of. You become the image of Christ. You become the hands, the work of Christ in your work, in other places. You will do more to glorify God or not glorify Him when you leave this place than you will ever do in here. Somehow we think, well, this is where we come to glorify God. Not really. We glorify God out there. Well, then what do we really do in here? This is part of the Sabbath rest. We keep it holy. The command wasn't to glorify God in the Sabbath. The command was, and keep it holy. Well, what does that mean? How does one keep it holy. 3 touch points again, real quick ones. But I'm switching, just to keep you on your toes, I'm switching to the letter R. Start with, once again, with the most obvious, rejuvenation. Didn't you? I love Kyle in that video, just the little kid who's going, there have been multiple studies that show excessive work will lead to depression and states of sadness. I said, you nailed it, Kyle. That's exactly it. Companies have discovered this, haven't they? Is that you work people 7 days a week, what happens? Productivity goes down, not up. That's where greed is going to bite you in the behind if you do that type of thing. But once again, we also said Sabbath rest is not a law, it is a principle. In other words, it's part of the design. It's the nature of God to have rest. Does God need it? He's all-powerful? No. But it's in his nature for a couple of reasons. The first, being the most obvious, is in the idea that we have been made to need a pattern of work rest. And the pattern has been set. Now, we are not Jews. We are not part of the Jewish system. The 10 Commandments were not spoken directly to you and I. That's somebody else's conversation. But the design is still there. 6 and 1, 6 and 1, 6 and 1. There's a pattern that we're called to follow. And if I were to rule and thumb it, it's not any kind of a law, but maybe just a little common sense would say at least this much with Sabbath rest as far as rejuvenation goes. If you do a lot of brain work, then probably on your day off, it's meant to be go out and get some physical exercise. And if your job is heavy labor, then probably on your day off, maybe you should be doing something that's more less physical and more brainy work. But it's meant to give you time away from what you do for a living. That's the first area of this rejuvenation. Your body, mind, intellect, everything needs time to rejuvenate. The next word in the R's would be, for me, relax. This is where it steps in with Steve's idea. Painted that car, beautiful job, and I step back and look at the whole picture. If your nose is to the grindstone all the time, you know what you can't see? The big picture. Step back. When God took time to step back on the Sabbath, he looked at everything at once. There's a time, and maybe a lot of times in life, that's exactly what we need to do, is step back and look at the big picture. And the big picture just isn't your little life. The big picture is the big picture. What is God doing with it all? And what's your part and my part in it? There is the big picture. There is time, if we've been honest in our work, that we can step back with gratification and say, you know, man, got something done worthwhile there. There is that sense of relaxation and stepping back to the big picture. The first two now of those R's can apply to anyone, really, if they're wise. The third one can't. The third one is only for people who are spiritually alive. To anyone else, it doesn't even make sense. And the third R is this: regeneration. Regeneration. This is where the qualification came in. Remember the Sabbath rest. Don't do any work. Okay, I got that down. But that wasn't the big emphasis. The big emphasis was keep it holy. Keep it holy. Unless you're exposed, unless you're open to a holy God, how do you even know what that means? What is holy? Kadesh was the word that would have been used by the Hebrews when they said this, and it means to be clean, either in ceremony or in morals, to be clean, to consecrate or dedicate. In the Christian design, it comes down to this: how can you connect with God? The only truly holy entity in the entire universe is God himself. How can you connect with God? How can you connect with what is God's? Well, that would kind of explain a little bit of the church side of things, wouldn't it? Connecting with God, connecting with anything that belongs to God, like God's people, that kind of connection. Writing to the Hebrew Christians in Hebrews 10:24, here's how it was laid out. And let us consider one another. Okay, there as you look left and right, guess who you see? One another. Why? In order to stir up love, all right, and good works. We do okay with the love, as Larry says, feel the love. So we have a hard time, Larry, don't we, getting everybody to sit down after the handshaking thing. Everybody's showing love. But the other side of that is, and stir them to good works. The rest that we were talking about, the Sabbath rest, allows you to do good works. It charges you to do good works. And part of that is this, not forsaking the assembling of ourselves together, as is the manner of some, but exhorting one another, and so much more as you see the day approaching. Of course, the day being the end day, the return of Christ. We are meant to meet together. We are meant to connect in this day in any way we can to keep it holy. In other words, to keep you holy. The job of this day isn't simply to rest. That has those elements. It is to refresh your holiness. That kind of changes it all around, doesn't it, a little bit? Changes the emphasis a bit. The way I would think of this is what comes to mind to me is that the Sabbath rest is actually like God's defense against erosion. Now, we know how water erosion works. I'm talking more in the line of spiritual erosion. But let me give you a mental picture. I'm going to get Ron to hit a little video for me there. This is actually in Texas. You can see this in California too. Somebody built $1 million home, beautiful neighborhood, beautiful view. And man, look at that. Part of it now has already collapsed. It makes me think of that verse, Matthew 7:27. And the rains descended, and the floods came, and the winds blew and beat on the house, and it fell, and a great was its fall. How does that come about? How does water erosion work? Well, most of the time, there's this house, it had its land and everything, and the water was relentless, but all it did was eat away an inch at a time. And then maybe a storm every now and then you go, whoa, I lost a big chunk there. But the house still sat fine. Life was still good. And then all of a sudden, boom, pieces of the house are over that cliff. It didn't happen all of a sudden. The undergirding was months, maybe years it took for this to take place. But the result was all of a sudden. That's exactly what happens in Sabbath rest. Is, here's where it's not a duty to be taking Sabbath and making it a holy. It's not a duty to come to church or whatever. It's this thing going on. We're getting eaten away at all the time. There's the stresses of life that are coming in and washing away a little bit of that undergirding. There is the trials. There's the just trying to work with the Lord. It's just so many things eating away. And sometimes somebody's got to come back and put the undergirding back in there. Somebody's got to fill in the cliff again. And when we don't have that in the Sabbath rest, slowly eating away and not getting replenished, at some point, that's you and me spiritually. That's how we end up spiritually. So the whole idea of rest is this pattern. Once a week, somebody comes in and puts some of the dirt back under your house. Once a week. And not just in here, it's Sabbath rest, keep the day. When you leave this place, what else? To replenish the holiness in your life.